Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of By the Way to Purposeful Procurement. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Fine-Tune CEO, Rich Ham. Rich, welcome back.
Thank you, Phil. Greetings.
All right. Well, today is a second part in a two-part mini-series within the podcast where we're talking to subject matter experts on your team at Fine-Tune around ways in which some of our incentives within procurement drive us to encourage suppliers to do things that may not be in our best long-term interests, but also some practices that suppliers often do, some sneaky ways that suppliers will come to us with good deals up front and get a contract signed. And then when we've disappeared to focus on our next contract, they come back and they find ways to build in and regather that margin that they gave up at the time of contracting. And we're going to do that today with two more of your team. We're going to be joined by Bob Schreiner and Keith Robinson. So why don't you give us a little bit of an intro on Bob and Keith?
Oh, I'll do that with pride, Phil. Bob Schreiner is one of the more interesting people I've met in my working life. I hired him because he's a guru in the security guard services world. We had strong client demand back in 2018 or so that led to my seeking out an executive level operations leader from that industry, and the timing turned out to be good because when I found Bob, Allied Universal had just acquired G4S, the third largest player in the space. Number one bought number three, and Bob had been at G4S for a long time. He was an operations executive running West Coast operations for G4S, and when I met the guy, I quickly realized, this guy's brilliant, and he's kind of I often thought of him as like the Sherlock Holmes of the security guard services industry. He, prior to his time at G4S, though, he had also been a section chief in the CIA for the better part of a decade, and so Bob has just an incredible career story. But his knowledge of the security guard services industry is almost impossible to match, and so I think your listeners will really enjoy and benefit from his insights. Next up, Keith Robinson, who's our VP of Pest Control Services. Once again, it was around the same time actually that we hired Bob. We had some Fortune 100 clients that had been asking for help in a couple of categories that we hadn't done a whole lot of work in yet. One was security guards, the other was pest control, and now, this hiring process was an interesting one because I quickly realized I'm looking for a needle in a haystack. What I needed was a board-certified entomologist, basically a doctor of bugs, right? And I came to learn, because one of the problems, and I think a lot of your listeners will have experienced this, procurement's efforts to work on pest control, especially in food environments, are often stymied by quality. The quality department stands in the way of procurement pursuing, and it's almost like quality gets scared if they hear the words pest control and cost savings in the same sentence. And so they often run interference against procurement's efforts in that category. So I needed somebody who could not just pass the smell test for quality, but who actually knew more than even the best quality personnel at large food companies. And I came to realize, okay, I need a board-certified entomologist. And it turns out there are only 600 BCEs in the United States, and only about 150 of those work in the commercial landscape. Most are in academia, they're expert witnesses in court proceedings. So I was looking for one of 150 people. But I also needed this person to have a mastery of the supplier landscape throughout North America, somebody who knew the tricks of the trade, the billing practices, but also the science and technology. I was like, where on earth am I going to find this person? And it was the worst hiring process I've ever been through. I looked at so many awful resumes, conducted so many interviews where I just knew 5 minutes in, this is never going to work. And then here comes Keith, and he's this polished, board-certified entomologist, 17 years in various executive roles at Terminix, had founded and sold his own pest control company, was VP of commercial accounts at a large regional player in Texas and Oklahoma, ABC Pest Control Services. And, I was just like, and he held every food safety certification under the sun, was a noted speaker on food safety matters. I flew him to Chicago and I wouldn't let him leave until he took the job. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's kind of how that went. I was like, this is the one and only person in the United States that would possibly fit this role, and I need him. Thankfully, he said yes, and he's been a tuner for the last 7 or so years since then. So I think your listeners are going to really enjoy listening to Keith, and they'll also see he's an entertaining person. And stay tuned, because at the end of our session with Keith, he's going to give us his list of his top 5 all-time favorite pests. So stay tuned for that. That's coming at the end of the episode.
Yep. So I really enjoyed these 2 conversations that we're going to share with you today. The first one, as we said, is going to be with Bob Schreiner. So let's just roll the tape on the conversation with Bob.
Thanks.
Well, first of all, Bob, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Now, the security guard category is one where we really want to continue on this theme of what are some of the tactics, techniques that suppliers in the space, again, in this case, security guard category, are really grabbing margin, potentially after a deal has been signed. It's not really something that you see up front. What are some of the things that you most frequently see in this space?
Well, one of the things that's very common, and we see it across the spectrum of providers, is that where the margin grabbing is cloaked in what otherwise seems like a reasonable approach, which is that the vendors come to the clients and basically say they need an increase in the wages for the officers themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and that generally resonates with the clients. You tend to get what you pay for when it comes to labor. And if you want to retain good people, you want them to be earning market competitive wages. So it's not uncommon for the vendors to come and say, hey, well, we really need a wage increase for the security officers at your location. We want to retain these people. What isn't always obvious to the clients is that when those new wages are implemented, the vendor typically takes an additional kind of bump in the margins over labor. And so you might have been at a 39% margin over labor. And then once you agree to these wage increases to make sure that the guards protecting your facilities are properly paid, then suddenly you're paying a 41% margin. And that has all been sort of cloaked in this process. So that's a very common thing that we see. We also see... Go ahead.
Forgive me, I wanted to ask about it, but I think you were getting ready to go there. Some of the games around stuff ranging from overtime, guard levels, holiday pay. I know that we find all kinds of billing phenomena in those areas.
No, absolutely. We refer to some of those kind of shenanigans as position rate variances, where if you can imagine, a junior level security guard has to call off. They are ill or they have childcare issues or whatever it is. And so he or she is not at their post. And maybe they're in a lobby position or a front gate or something like that. And so the vendor is scrambling to patch that hole in their schedule, and maybe they don't have enough people otherwise. And so they put in a more senior person into that role temporarily, or a supervisor. According to the terms of the contract, the client should have been billed at that lower level rate, but it's not uncommon to have the vendor charge at the higher rate because they're having to pay this person that basically is doing them a favor by filling in for somebody else, and typically makes more money. Well, now the client is paying a higher rate for a lower level position. And you also mentioned overtime. It's also common if the vendors themselves don't have, if they haven't properly prepared for staffing, shortfalls, whether it's flex officers or additional personnel. If there is a hole in the schedule, again, somebody's sick or they go on vacation or whatever it might be, they're supposed to, be able to kind of fill this as at the normal straight time rates. But it's not uncommon for them to fill it at, they have to run overtime. Somebody has to stay over an extra shift or work an extra day or whatever it might be to patch that hole. That should be billed to the client at straight time rates, but very commonly it is billed at overtime rates because the vendor is having to pay overtime to their personnel. And those types of things squeak through in the billing. And they also will bill for things like non-labor issues, whether it's vehicles, healthcare equipment. Those are all potential ways to increase margin on the vendor side.
Can I ask how quickly does this add up? Because you can look at we needed to pay somebody overtime, or we needed to bring somebody in to cover a sickness, and on its own, it's probably not a lot of money. It happens once, but I can imagine scale that thousands of times, it quickly adds up. So what's kind of the size of the problem, or put another way, the opportunity, I guess, to find overbilling that you can then claw back because of tactics like this that are used?
It certainly is dependent on the scale of the operation, and what we have seen from time to time is scenarios where the larger the security program, and the more likely this can happen. And it really goes back to how well prepared is this vendor to properly staff this circumstance. I mean, this is security. Man security is a people business, and people come and go. They get sick. They have to they go on vacation. They have to get their car repaired or whatever it might be. And so part of the obligation on the vendor side is to adequately prepare for those types of shortfalls. And it's not uncommon that the vendors don't, because they otherwise might have someone sort of sitting around on the sidelines who isn't actively working, or they have to put them somewhere else. And so it's not uncommon to have a site somewhat short-staffed, and even though there is a contractual obligation. And so the larger the site, the greater the possibility that this can in fact build up over time. And we certainly have seen scenarios where very large locations, if they're not properly managed on the vendor side, can be consistently running short of personnel week over week, month over month. And that can add up into thousands and tens of thousands of dollars of overbilling if the circumstance isn't being managed or monitored by the client. And a lot of times the clients simply don't know what to look for, or they don't have the bandwidth to actually kind of manage this or monitor it on invoice by invoice. Those invoices themselves can be page after page. It can be thousands of hours at any given time, and trying to find out which of those line item things was an overbilling. It should have been billed at one rate or another, or was overtime that wasn't authorized. That's not an easy thing to be able to just kind of pick out and identify.
Phil, just to use an example that came to my attention just yesterday, there was an account that we had pursued. We wanted to help them manage their guard services expenses, and I believe it was in 2021 that we had looked at the program. It was running about $18 million a year. Literally just yesterday, we managed to reconnect with them. We had warned them, your costs are going to skyrocket here. It's this perfect storm of leaned out resources on your side, real inflation, wage increases, and a guard services provider that knows how to capitalize on these conditions to increase your spend. The conditions in the account literally have not changed over the last 4 years. It's essentially the same account it was 4 years ago. It's $27 million today. It's gone up 50% since we failed to win the business 4 years ago. We hope that they'll come around and adopt the fine-tuned strategy this time around. Bob, I want to pivot here to talk a little bit about I think an interesting prism through which to observe security guard services and the vendor tactics within them. In recent years, I don't think I'm saying anything terribly controversial when I say that we've had some disasters, perhaps more than historically a normal rate of disasters. Some natural, flooding, earthquakes, fires, and others like a global pandemic. And you have told me on more than one occasion about how guard services vendors have managed to capitalize in kind of, I would say shocking fashion from these sorts of disaster events. Maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about some of those tactics.
Sure. You're absolutely right that unfortunately, security is it's a inherently risk-based service. It unfortunately preys upon fears and concerns, some legitimate, some perhaps more perception than reality. And so certainly natural disasters, things like wildfires, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, or something like a pandemic, those scenarios play into those fears. And again, some legitimate, some perhaps overblown. And so unfortunately, the vendors themselves they've figured out how to capitalize on this. And, part of the sort of one of the kind of dirty little secrets in the security industry is that natural disasters and the security response post-disaster, whether it's a flood or a wildfire, that can help certain regional elements of a security company, and sometimes an entire security company. They can that the revenue they generate post disaster can make or break their entire year. It's something that they really do capitalize on, and it's truly unfortunate. And we've seen all sorts of scenarios where the rates that are being charged to clients in a post disaster environment are just outrageously high. And we saw it in post COVID as well. It was not uncommon in the immediate months after the first lockdowns, where companies that were trying to maintain their basic operations were having people come to work and they needed their temperatures taken in their lobby. And so security firms were all too willing to provide personnel to help take temperatures. And they would, the security company would provide those handheld, thermometers that people could use. And we were seeing routinely that an entry-level security guard making perhaps $15 an hour, who'd had 15 minutes of training to point this thermometer at somebody's forehead, that service was being charged at $45 or $50 an hour to the clients.
So the knucklehead making 15 bucks an hour all of a sudden acquires the advanced skill of pointing a thermometer at someone's forehead, and their value triples magically as a result.
Exactly. And so unfortunately, the line between profit and profiteering is definitely blurred when it comes to disaster response, post-disaster response. And it's understandable that clients want to protect their assets. You want to protect from looting. You want to protect from, indiscriminate damage, whatever it might be. But the rates that we see the industry charging in those circumstances in some cases, are truly outrageous.
All right, I think it's time to wrap up this segment, but I want to really thank you so much for joining us, Bob, and look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, so a lot of great insights from Bob, and we can't leave you. We've had a drum roll on how we finish this segment with Keith, but Keith has a lot to share about the pest control industry and some of the tactics and strategies that are used by suppliers in that space. So we can't, look over that for the last question that we gave him. But with that said, let's roll the tape. This time on our conversation with Keith Robinson. Keith Robinson, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hey, Keith.
Now, one of the questions, or one of the things that we're hearing from your peers a lot is that suppliers charging for products that don't exist or services that they haven't actually performed. And I wondered, is that something that you also see in the pest control space?
It is. It's kind of common in our category as well. If you think about pest control and its seasonality effect, there's a lot of service items that are being done, probably really active in the season, and then they still stay on the books for the off season, but they're obviously not being maintained at the same level. So we see a big difference in services that are actually being charged for, but not done in the off seasons.
What are some examples of that, Keith? The thing that jumps to mind immediately for me is mosquitoes in December in Chicago. Not a big mosquito problem in Chicago in December. Are there others that come to mind for you like that?
Exterior power sprays are another thing. Fly control. If you're a food-related account, you're doing fly control. You're checking into interior devices for fly populations and things like that. They're not going to be there in the winter months either. Even exterior rodent control, where you're checking bait stations. If you're in Minneapolis and you got 6 feet of snow on the ground, you're not going to be able to get to those devices.
Had never considered that. Of course not. Keith, one of the things that I learned from you about the pest control industry is, sure, you can look at an invoice, and that invoice gives you some idea of what, in theory, is being performed. But you really need to get your hands on the service tickets, and oftentimes the service tickets will inform you as to what could have possibly even been done at a particular facility on a given delivery, or a service day. Tell us a little bit about what you can learn from the service ticket and what it tells you in this context.
Yeah, technology is a big part of pest control in today's market. So these individual technicians are using a handheld device, and they're recording, it's time stamping the time that they come into the facility. And it's also, as they go through the facility, if they're scanning different devices, it's recording that information. They're putting notes in there of specific pests that they're observing along the way. So that gives us a good indication at the end of the service by looking, and all of that information is downloaded into a service ticket that's provided to the site at conclusion of the service. So that tells us how much time that they're actually spending at the location, warranted or based on the amount that they're charging that location for those services that are being performed.
Now, is there a typical rule of thumb when you're looking at services that are invoiced? We talked about invoicing for services that are not actually performed. Is there a percentage where you say, you know what, that was 10%, we kind of assume that wasn't performed, or 50%, or somewhere in the middle? Or does that really differ based on circumstance?
It definitely based on the areas of the country that these are. You think about the things that we just talked about with the off-season needs. So if we see recurring items that there's no way possible that they're being serviced that specific time of year because the pest threat's not even there.
Yeah.
So those are things that we see that they continue to be charged. The client continues to be charged for those items, and they're not even checked at that point in time. So we see. So if you wanted to go to percentage wise, you probably look at compliance wise. In the heat of the summer, where their pests are the most active, they're probably maintaining 70 to 80%, of what they of the recurring charge that they allocated. In the winter months, it may drop down to where, there may be 30, 40% that of the service items that aren't even being checked at all or aren't necessary.
Phil, one of my favorite all-time pest control stories is an example kind of along these lines. Keith, I'm going to say he busted a small-time scam for one of our clients. They had a plant up in Canada, and the plant was getting billed for goose control services, control, for chasing Canadian geese off the property. Keith, give us a couple of details about this example.
So this particular site had a corporate office and attached to the facility. In the main office, you had a goose that created a nest right by the front door. So they asked the pest control provider, hey, we can never have this happen again, because they had to cordon off the area. They had to access the building. While the goose was on the nest, they had to access the building from a different part. So the pest control provider came up with a creative solution. He said, look, I can bring a dog out there that's been specifically trained to go through and around the facility to make sure there's no geese that are nesting or starting to develop a nesting pattern in that area. So as we started asking questions, we got down to it, and we found out that this was not a highly skilled and trained canine. This was actually his dog from the house, sitting on the couch next to him at night. He decided to find a way to charge. It was Fido. He was charging $640 to run around the building once or twice a month. And, all year, and the same thing, all year long, even though the geese aren't there for the majority of the year, I'm going to have that service built in. So it's going to happen every single month of the year.
Oh, that's the best part. Yeah, the invoice was coming in December when the geese were in New Orleans, and this was north of the border. It's a fantastic story.
Well, they had to go for a walk to check to make sure the goose wasn't there.
That's right. Yeah, make sure. You never know when you're going to find a Canadian goose in Canada in December. Keith, I want to hit one other area, kind of subcategory of the pest control universe, and it's pest control is kind of a scary expense, especially if you're in food, where spending tends to often be driven by fear. And I think this has a tendency to cause certain unnecessary services to be performed. And there's a really obvious area within pest control, foggings and fumigations. For starters, can you just educate our listeners a little bit on what are fogging and fumigation services and why do they tend to be performed?
So, foggings versus fumigations. Foggings, if you think about it as an aerosol product. So if you go into a plant or facility and they've got flying insects or they got crawling insects and they got adult populations, then these treatments are intended to knock down the populations at that point in time. So think about this: the fog goes up, anything that it comes in contact with, it's going to have an effect and control, but it can't get underneath anything. It can't penetrate packaging material and things like that. So it has limited control, and it doesn't effectively control all the different life cycles. So it's limited on what it can actually do as well. So it's like a Band-Aid situation to kind of suppress activity levels. And if you're noticing that you're starting to have some uptick in some pest activity, versus fumigation, where fumigation is an actual gas, and fumigation kills all life cycles of the insect, and it penetrates through packaging material, through pallets, even through walls and things like that. So but the cost difference is sizable between those two services as well.
Oh, fumigate! This is expensive stuff. We had a client a few years back that spent $1 million on a single fumigation event. It was at a port location, and it was these can be big ticket projects. Keith, you told me an amazing thing a few years back about foggings and fumigations that I've never forgotten. I asked you the question, what percentage of these services are avoidable? Do you remember the answer you gave me?
I do. 80 to 90% can be avoided.
Yeah, amazing.
And it used to be that these treatments back, I started in the industry in the 90s, and back when I started, it was still kind of a normal thing that every holiday, every 4th of July, every Memorial Day, when a plant was going to be shut down, you were going to have a fumigation or a fogging event happen. That was just part of the normal services. But now we've gotten smarter and we've learned more about the insects. So now we've realized with sanitation controls and better inspection practices, then we can control the problem without having to do these extensive treatments. And, they're kind of environmental nightmares if you think about it.
Oh, sure. Just spewing toxic chemicals into the plant. And Keith told me a fantastic story a couple years back about the crack in the foundation. There was a crack in the foundation of a plant that was the source of an infestation that would occur every July. Now, who's telling the customer they need to do this fumigation? It's the pest control supplier. Mm-hmm. The pest control supplier knows about the crack in the foundation, but why would they want the customer to fix that crack in the foundation? The infestation is worth $250,000 to them every July. They get to do the big, expensive fumigation service, so they're never telling the customer. The fox is guarding the hen house. You have no incentive for the pest control supplier to help you fix the problem. So, yeah, tons of unnecessary services in pest control. And I was just amazed when Keith said that 80 to 90% of these, and it's not just the cost of the service. You're shutting down operations. These are hugely disruptive events. It's truly amazing.
So how do you determine which ones are, what's the 10 to 20% that should be occurring versus the question. 80 to 90% that shouldn't?
Well, and you think about it, these pests that you're fumigating and fogging for, sometimes they're introduced at different times. So there's grain products that the pests are already in there, so they're fumigating rail cars that are coming down from Kansas that have corn related products in it. And so that's necessary to do that kind of step, because you're doing a kill step. You're controlling the insect or there's a possibility that they're going to be in that food source. But the problem comes in is if you've got an uptick in a facility with some pest activity in a certain area where you're monitoring it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to fog and fumigate the entire facility. Just find the source of the infestation and deal with that. So that's kind of where we've kind of grown to over the years is let's find the source of the infestation. Could be a pallet of compromised flour or something that could be in there. That once you remove that, get that out of the facility, there's no need. You could do some localized treatment, but there's no need to do a fumigation and a fogging.
Well, Keith, we're going to get you out of here soon, but I can't let you leave without having a little fun with you, as our listeners are probably learning. Keith is an amazing personality in the pest control world. He kind of reminds me. Phil and I were joking earlier. You're kind of like a Jack Hanna or Marlon Perkins, one of these zoo celebrities, but in the pest control world. And so I want our listeners to be able to have a little fun with you here. And I've asked Keith to give some thought to this before today's episode. Keith, you've had 35 years in the pest control world. You've encountered a lot of crazy pests in your time. We want your top 5 greatest pests or favorite pests of all time, counting down from 5 to 1. And you can give our listeners just a couple little facts about each one as you go, the fun facts about the pest. Let's start with number 5. Your number 5 favorite pest of all time is?
Number 5 would be, I cut my teeth on this one, and that's the subterranean termite. And
I would never let a termite anywhere near my teeth.
When you think about economic damage that these insects do themselves, and how I've seen them get into different structures and cause different damage, that would have to be on the list, and certainly one I've got a lot of experience with. The second one on my list would be, let's move on to public health. Okay, number 4 would be mosquitoes. You think about mosquitoes and West Nile problems and all the other effects that you deal with that. So mosquitoes would be one. Then I would go to, staying with the public health, I like ticks. I like to go on in the woods and stuff like that. So ticks is another favorite of mine. Also a carrier of diseases like Lyme disease and things like that.
This sounds
now,
like an average day in Florida.
Oh yeah. But by the way, we're gonna put this on your epitaph, Keith. 50 years from now, when you've left us all, I like ticks.
I like ticks.
That's Keith's parting shot. Yeah. All right, wait. That's number 3. What number 2?
Okay, number 2. We're going to move into the last 15 years. I've spent almost exclusively on the food side of the business. So I'm going to go into stored products pests. And these are the pests they're in our food already. A lot of people don't realize that they're already there. And one of them would be Indian meal moth. So the Indian meal moth is, if you've ever been over to somebody's house, or you've had an old bag of dog food in the cabinet, and all of a sudden you open up the pantry and these moths start coming out of it. That's the Indian meal moth. So that's number 2.
We need a drum roll or something. We should have had fanfare along the way where we were doing like a da-da every time he names one. But we have arrived at number 1. Keith Robinson, pest control guru, board certified entomologist. Number 1 all-time favorite pest is?
I would have to say that it is the red-legged ham beetle.
And what does one of those do?
Now, one of those, you find them a lot in the pet food industry. So they're drawn to protein. They're an aggressive kind of a creature that they just they wander around. They're a scavenger feeder that kind of goes into protein areas and things like that. So they eat a lot of protein, but they're very destructive in the way. But of course, Rich loves that for a number of reasons.
Oh, I've heard the red-legged ham beetle story a number of times through the years. I was hoping, honestly, I have to admit, I was hoping that was your number 1. What I did not know until today was red-legged ham beetles like ham. They apparently
That's exactly
eat ham.
right.
Okay, well, I'll have to keep on the lookout then. Keith Robinson, we can't thank you enough for your time. This was a whole lot of fun, and I think the listeners probably enjoyed it too. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Keith.
Thank you.
Well, that was fun. Really enjoyed I enjoy every interaction I have with Keith Robinson. It is a privilege to employ him, but I think your listeners just got a glimpse of a jewel of a human who also has voluminous knowledge about a really complex indirect service category. So that was a lot of fun.
As somebody who lives in Florida, the bugs were like, well, I deal with those every day. That felt like my everyday kind of personal pest control problems is ticks, mosquitoes, and termites, and everything in between.
I'm telling you, Phil, I never saw this coming when I hired him, but I will, my wife or I will text Keith a picture of something we found around the house and say, what is this? And he will not just reply with a text, but with a video of himself talking with this zeal about, oh, that's a that's a such and such wolf spider, and here's what you should do to maintain it. But or there were these paper wasps in front of my garage recently, and he said, but don't kill them because these are beneficial pests. So you want to relocate them. Just put some lemon juice on the side of the house. It's fantastic. The guy has such enthusiasm for his field and is obviously an encyclopedia of pest control knowledge.
I already have a short list of things I want to reach out to him.
Well, I'll make sure you get his info before we leave the studio. That absolutely no problem. So yeah, that was great. Looking ahead, Phil, I think for the listeners' benefit, in our next episode, we're going to have what we've come to call another episode of The Fill-Ins, where Rich, Phil, and Kelly get together and talk about what just happened, the episodes leading in, and then what's coming next. And we certainly will digest the conversations we've had with David McCarty and talking about the incentive plan flaws in procurement through the lens of a GPO and a leading player in the GPO space. And then also this getting down into the specifics that the tuners have shared in these last couple of episodes, the nuggets that they imparted to the listeners in those episodes. But then we'll also be looking ahead to the next series of episodes. And I look forward to chatting with you and Kelly.
All right. Well, we'll be back in a couple of weeks with that episode. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Until then, take care, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks, everybody.